Welcome, everybody. We're here to break down the Patriots 2025 draft. We've had a day now to regroup a little bit, analyze, dive into the film, maybe not, maybe.
I'm sure Evan has.
Maybe a little bit.
I'm on UDFAs at this point.
So it's a great time. This is my favorite time of the draft, guys, because it's just, hey, here's you guys. This is who you have. You can study the film. It all matters now. So I'm just going to start with you, Paul. Just what's your big takeaway overall from this draft class?
So I feel as good about it, with a couple of days to think, as I did while it was unfolding. And my two big takeaways were 2 and 3. The playmakers that they got with the running back and the wide receiver, Henderson and Williams. I just felt like this offense really, really needed an injection of playmaking ability. I think these two guys offer that. So those are the two guys I'm most excited about.
Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I love those picks too, but I just thought the 2 day 3 picks on the defensive line put a bow on the entire draft. Deuce and I clambered the entire weekend. Just get us one developmental edge, one guy that can rush the passer with some upside, and Braden Swinson certainly has those boxes checked. Joshua Farmer, I think, is a nice fit for them on the interior, kind of a hybrid defensive end, defensive tackle type of player. But I just felt like adding Swinson to this mix, where they got him to, one of the best, based off of the consensus boards, one of the best value picks of the entire draft across the league, was a big get for them.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about Swinson just for a second. I was ready to go through these in order, but you jumped in on it, Evan. Going back, looking at Swinson, now maybe I was a little bit disappointed, to be honest, that there's a lot of developmental edges in this draft. And I had my eye on Michael Williams. I know that wasn't going to happen. He ended up going in the top 10. But I do think that Braden Swinson is what they needed. As they got later in the day, and we talked about it on the draft, I said, I need pass rush. I need a pass rusher. I don't necessarily need, some guys were longing for Jack Sawyer. I'm like, well, he's not really going to bring the juice. I think Swinson will bring some of that juice. He's a low-round guy. Hard to expect a lot out of him. But that was my only, qualm, I guess, minor from the draft. But otherwise, Paul, I just was so impressed with Henderson. And, as you come back into the draft, you see some of these guys, huge running back class. But as I watch more and more of him, he's explosive. He can catch the ball. I know he's one of your favorite guys, but talk about a complementary player with Ramondre Stevenson and how you have, I think, what'd you call it on draft night? Thunder and lightning a little bit.
Absolutely.
But he is explosive. He is fun to watch. I just think that element to the offense. And when I made my mock draft pick about Ashton Genty, this is a little bit what I was talking about, though, trying to get some of that explosiveness in the running back position.
And I think he's well-rounded. I think he's going to give some of that those pass-catching abilities that Josh McDaniels covets, and he also has a great reputation as a blitz pickup guy in pass protection. I think you've seen some tapes that have floated around over the weekend, some Twitter clips that have gone out with him. This guy really enjoys that aspect of the game. So when you think back to, say, Shane Vereen and James White and how they kind of had redshirt years, maybe you won't need one of those with Henderson, because my guess is those guys needed to learn some of those elements of the game. I don't think Henderson will have that learning curve. And again, the playmaking side of this is what I'm looking at. It's a guy that, I think he was 3rd in the nation in runs of 10 yards or more last year. So this is a guy he's going to give you an opportunity to, I don't know if he's going to be like an every down back where he's going to get, say 250 carries, when he's ready to do that. He might be better in smaller stints, with his touches. But I just like the idea of Josh McDaniels trying to get him in space, trying to work matchups the way he did with James White on linebackers. Only this guy, I think, is going to be more explosive in the open field than even James White was.
Yeah, I want to tee you up on this one because we talked so much the last couple of months about the running back position. We knew it was a great group. I think 2 things we said. They got to get a left tackle. They got to get one of these running backs this year. Why do you think they went as early as they did with this player? I mean, our mock drafts, we were day 3. Let's get a rotational guy, and there still are good guys available. But what do you think made them go for Henderson so early?
Well, I think it's the special element of his game-breaking speed, and when you watch him on tape, it's a multitude of different ways, but he can also run the football between the tackles and get loose and find space and find daylight. So when you put it all together, he probably has a little bit more of a volume skill set than some of the guys we maybe we're talking about that were a little bit further down the draft, guys that were really pass game specialists, like a Bashard Smith later on, or Woody Marks, or somebody like that, or an early down specialist, like a Devin Neal or a Damian Martinez, who ended up going pretty late in this draft. Those guys were bowling balls and early down runners. Travion Henderson's a more complete back than those players. I still think his best role, like Paul was saying, is probably in a platoon, like he was with Quinshon Judkins at Ohio State. I've compared it a little bit to David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit. Can you get that kind of platoon out of Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson? Just to piggyback off Paul again, I don't think this is a situation where Travion Henderson is going to be fighting for playing time his rookie season. I think he's going to play a lot, and I think he's going to have all the opportunities in the world to hit big plays and get him loose and get him into space. So I'm looking forward to seeing it.
All right, Paul, I know you mentioned Kyle Williams already, and Kyle Williams was a player in the draft leading up to that. We mentioned him a bunch. He was a guy we really liked. Kept saying, again, wanted to add speed to the wide receiver room. That's what Kyle Williams brings. Just felt to me like an element that they lacked a little bit. They've got a lot of receivers on the roster, but it seems like Kyle Williams can have a unique kind of fit for Josh McDaniels.
Yeah, and this is one of those deals where you sort of look at how it all fit together. Like, do you take the wide receiver at 2 in the second round? So you decide to take the running back. So people are going to look at some of these clumps of position players. Like, there were a bunch of running backs that went the next round. I think there was like 6 or 7 running backs, I think, in the third round or something like that, fourth round. You guys had talked a lot about how the depth was at running back, edge. You could get good players. So they decided to go running back first, then wide receiver. I liked it because I felt like this was a different kind of wide receiver than what they've been targeting. And I know people are hearing that Kyle Williams is fast, and they're immediately saying, well, that's what you told us about Tyquan Thornton. I don't think there's a lot of similarities in the way they play. I love Evan's term of the speed slot, and I keep stealing it because I think it makes it's a distinction to make it different than what we kind of been accustomed to, the little sort of, Demario Douglas in between the numbers, winning quickly on short routes. This guy can get downfield and make plays. Listen, we've heard this about wide receivers that the Patriots have taken before. Why is this guy different? I think he has a different skill set.
Yeah, what do you think, Gav?
Yeah, the most exciting part to me about Kyle Williams is that he can play a little bit on the outside. So even though I would say he's probably at his best playing that slot or off the line flanker role where they can move him around and get him off the line of scrimmage with free releases and things like that, he does have reps, translatable reps playing on the outside against Travis Hunter back in 2023, for example, where he has a great release package, he has great acceleration, he has the ability to stack corners and win down the field on vertical routes. So you can see a world where him and Stephon Diggs are both on the field together, and they're playing off of each other and they're complementary to one another. But he still has that route running ability, separation ability, and yards after the catch. He averaged over 8 yards after the catch per reception last year at Washington State. So he still has that ability to do those types of things too that we've seen out of the McDaniels offense and out of receivers that have succeeded here in the past. So it's a little blend of both. I'm really excited about Kyle Williams. He rose up the board as the process went on. It was a kind of a classic pre-draft riser where the Senior Bowl stood out there, had a good week down in Mobile, has a great combine, runs the 4.4, and all of a sudden you start hearing more and more top 100 pick, and he starts creeping up the media boards. And just the last thing I would say about him, I was really pleasantly surprised that they waited to the third round to draft him. I had him in my last mock draft as their second round pick. And I thought for sure this is a classic. The Patriots will draft this guy in the second round, even though the rest of the league values him really in the third round, like they did a little bit with Polk or Tyquan or whatever. And they played the board perfectly in this case, and they got Henderson and they got Kyle Williams by doing so.
And then real quick, Mike, you just look at it. All the work they did in free agency tended to focus on the defensive side. They come 1, 2, 3. Will Campbell, Travion Henderson, Kyle Williams, offense. All should help Drake May. This is why I think there's a little bit more enthusiasm and excitement around what Mike Vrabel and Elliott Wolf and Ryan Cowden are trying to put together than what we had a year ago.
Yeah, I don't want to bury the lead. Of course, Will Campbell, the 4th overall pick, but I think we talked a lot about him. We know what he brings to the party. We talked a little bit morning of Thursday's draft. They got to get a left tackle that night, and I think that bore itself out. Ariante Ursary was one that got into the second round, but otherwise, Josh Simmons rounding out that first round. Everybody was gone. And just in hindsight now, I'm really glad we got Will Campbell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think looking at some of the guys that were at the top of the second round that we were hearing a lot of clamoring for. Luther Burden, Arianti Ursary, like you mentioned, would have been there at 38 if they wanted to go that direction. But I think, Burden, we knew, had some character red flags coming into the draft that maybe would have had him off the board. And as it turns out, it sounds like Ursary might have had a few, just motivation and work ethic and that kind of stuff. And Will Campbell has about a clean of a prospect billing as you could possibly have in terms of intangibles, athletic profile, tape. There's pretty much no real flaw other than, of course, the arms, in terms of what he can bring to the table. So I've been so impressed by every single interaction that we've had with him, that we've seen of him. I've talked to a few people down at LSU about him, and they just said, you guys have had a lot of great players come through New England. This kid's next. Like, this is the next guy that we're going to be talking about, for years to come down here in Foxborough.
Let's just move on here, a little bit of the day 3 flavor. Craig Woodson, a little bit of a surprise, I think, to all of us. Just maybe the only player of the day that was like, I think I get it. And it seems like he can played more free safety snaps at Cal, but still has that, plays all over, can play in the box, can make some plays. But probably not that much of a surprise, Paul, getting another safety into that group. We've wondered,
it was
do
a
they like the
sneaky need,
makeup?
right? Not a lot of people talked about free safety, with wide receiver and tackle and some of the playmaking spots, but it wasn't need for them. I do think it was a hole. I think, obviously Peppers and Duggar are very similar kind of players. He fits that kind of a profile. I think athletically he is sort of average. I don't think he's off the charts in terms of his range, but you talk to people that are familiar with that program, and he's a guy who was there for a long time. He's spent 6 years in college, but got better as he went along. Missed the entire 21 season with a knee injury, but the last 3 seasons he's been pretty productive in that kind of a role for Cal. So we'll see if he can come in here. Probably going to have to earn a game day role on special teams initially, but there's an opportunity to be, in the mix as one of the, say, 6 defensive backs. I think he'll get a shot.
Yeah, Ev, I want to ask you about Jared Wilson, who inexperienced player, 1 year at Georgia at center. I really enjoyed watching him. Didn't really see him in the pre-draft process, but he's a big guy. He's really athletic. And I guess my question for you is, do you see him entering that center competition, or do you see him entering the left guard competition? Where's he better fit?
Well, I think as a rookie, there's a chance that he could be playing some left guard, because if you start to talk about the best 5 and getting the best 5 out there, is there a world where Garrett Bradbury and Jared Wilson are part of the best 5, and how do you get those guys on the field? With that being said, I think he is a center long-term. I think his long-term fit is at center, and you start to hear some things about what he could bring to the center position. And one of the comparisons I heard was Eric McCoy down in New Orleans. His athleticism and ability to get out in front of screens to the second and third level in the run game. That type of stuff is not normal from a center, and you see the athleticism reflected in his combine testing as well. So if you have a dynamic center like that can make those blocks on the move and can get out in space and things like that, the center you typically hear is the pace of the offensive line. Like, he controls the pace of the whole group. So kind of like a middle linebacker on the defensive side of the ball. So if you have a center that's that dynamic and that athletic, then you really are adding a dimension to your offensive line that maybe you wouldn't have normally. So he's a wide body. He's got good power, good leverage. They're working a little bit on his hand placement right now, I think, in the offseason. But in general, there's a lot to like about him as a player, and he'll learn a little bit under Bradbury, who's a veteran center and has started a ton of games in the league. That would be my one thing about him playing center early. I think if it was an open competition, he might win the center job outright just because of his talent. But he's only started 1 year at Georgia. He doesn't have a ton of experience. There's a lot of mental stuff on a center at this level. So maybe you start him out at left guard if he's too good to keep him off the field, and then let Bradbury handle the communication aspect.
All right, so just briefly touch on some of the day 3, round 6 and 7 players. Andy Borregales, the kicker from Miami, big leg, consensus #1 kicker. They felt like they needed to use a 6th-round pick and make sure they got him. Marcus Bryant was the left tackle opposite Armand Membo. Big guy, again, a little bit raw. Julian Ashby, they picked up a long snapper. I think that surprised everybody. And finally, Kobe Minor, defensive back, as Mr. Irrelevant. So, guys, I'll just throw it out to you generally for those final 4 picks. What stands out to you?
Well, obviously the kicker. You know, and I'm not a huge, I say this all the time, I'm not a huge fan of drafting the specialists, but if this was the one guy that you thought stood out amongst the rest of them and you didn't want to risk that no one would take a flyer on him, then by all means go and get him. It's a need. You know, Joey Sly is gone, so it's John Parker Romo is the only kicker that was currently on the roster, so you definitely were going to have some competition. You know, he was the number one guy on most people's draft boards. Bring him in.
Yeah, who stands out to you, Ev?
Yeah, there wasn't a single person I saw that had Borgales not number one among the kickers.
No, I saw it. Same thing.
You know, all the way across the board, he was the consensus number one kicker. Marcus Bryant stands out to me, though, as a player that has some raw tools and upside. And if you're going to take a player that late in the draft, you got to have something that you can sink your teeth into and say, you know, this is why we want to work with him. So he's got the athleticism, he's got the length, obviously, which we talk a lot about at that position this offseason, to play left tackle, and that's what he did. You know, they felt comfortable with him sticking at left tackle that they didn't move Membo. You know, they kept him on the right side. That says a lot. He's a little bit high cut. You know, he's got longer legs and a shorter torso, and that leads to some issues with leveraging and pad level and all that good stuff. But if they can figure out a way to coach him up around those types of limitations, then I do think that he has upside to be a solid backup or maybe swing tackle down the road. Obviously, 7th round, you're not projecting starter, but this team needed tackle depth, and you might as well take a flyer on somebody that's got a bunch of traits, you know, that you can work with.
All right, well, that's going to put a bow on the 2025 draft for us. Of course, some UDFA signings coming as well, rounding out the roster. OTA's up next, though. We'll get a look at some of these guys as we build up to minicamp. Stick with us all spring.